The night Sheriff Mark Reynolds received the DNA test results, his world shattered. For years, he had built a life around family, law, and order, believing he understood the people closest to him. But as he stared at the paper in his hands, reality twisted into something unrecognizable. His two beloved children, the ones he had raised, protected, and cherished, were not biologically his. The father, his own brother. Mark's hands trembled as he tried to make sense of it. His mind raced back through the years, replaying moments that once seemed ordinary, but now felt like pieces of a hidden puzzle. How could this happen? Had his wife known? Had his brother, the man he had trusted more than anyone, betrayed him in the worst possible way? The weight of the truth pressed down on him, and with it, something darker crept in, a feeling he had never allowed himself to entertain. Anger. Betrayal. A storm of emotions he couldn't control. He needed answers, he needed the truth, and most of all, he needed to face the man responsible. What started as a simple curiosity about family history had turned into something much more dangerous. As the sheriff prepared to confront his brother, he had no idea just how far this discovery would push him, or how deadly the consequences would be. Stay tuned as we unravel a story of secrets, deception, and a family torn apart by a truth no one was ready to face. Mark sat alone in his dimly lit office, the DNA results still clutched in his hands. The quiet hum of the station's fluorescent lights did nothing to calm the storm raging inside him. He had spent years upholding the law, ensuring justice for others, but now justice felt like a distant, unreachable concept in his own life. His brother, Jake, had always been his closest confidant. They had grown up together, survived hardships side by side. But now, Mark questioned everything he thought he knew about him. Had this been an affair? A secret betrayal carried on behind his back? Or was there something more sinister at play? His mind raced through every possibility, each one worse than the last. His wife, Emily, had never given him reason to doubt her. Their marriage had its struggles, like any other, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Mark reached for his phone, hovering over Jake's name. He could already hear the calm, easy tone of his brother's voice, the same voice that had stood beside him through childhood fights and family losses. But now it felt different, deceptive. He set the phone down, breathing heavily. A confrontation wouldn't be enough. He needed to know why. As Mark dug deeper, searching through old records, texts, and memories, he realized the truth had been right in front of him all along. He had just never wanted to see it. The walls of Mark's office felt like they were closing in. His breath was uneven, his hands clammy as he sifted through old photo albums and family records. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, some kind of sign, a hint that this had been happening right under his nose. But every picture of Jake smiling beside him, every holiday memory, felt like a cruel joke now. Had his brother always been lying to him? And worse, had Emily? Mark's gut told him to go home, to demand answers, but something held him back. If he walked through that front door now, filled with the rage bubbling inside him, he wasn't sure what he would say or do. Instead, he found himself driving, the roads blurring under the weight of his thoughts. His truck rumbled down the familiar path to his parents' old house, a place filled with childhood memories of scraped knees and whispered secrets between brothers. But now those memories felt tainted. As he pulled into the driveway, the front porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the yard. Jake's truck was parked out front, just like it always was. Mark sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. A dozen questions swirled in his mind, but one kept rising above the rest. How far back did this betrayal go? He needed the truth, but the truth had a way of breaking things beyond repair. And once he opened this door, there would be no going back. Mark stepped out of his truck, his boots crunching against the gravel as he made his way to the front door. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, his mind running wild with every possibility of what he was about to uncover. He had always trusted Jake, relied on him even. But that trust was gone now, replaced with something darker. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The house smelled the same as it always had: wood, smoke, and coffee, a mix of comfort and familiarity. But tonight, nothing felt familiar. Jake sat at the kitchen table, a half-empty beer bottle in front of him, his expression unreadable. He looked up as Mark stepped inside, his eyes flickering with something: concern, guilt. "Didn't expect to see you here this late," Jake said, leaning back in his chair. His voice was calm, too calm. Mark didn't sit. He stood there, gripping the back of a chair, his knuckles turning white. "I need you to tell me the truth." Jake didn't flinch. "About what?" "You know what." Mark's voice was low, controlled. The tension in the room was suffocating. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Jake let out a slow breath, rubbing his hands together like he was stalling. "Mark, listen." No, Mark cut him off. His pulse was racing now. "No more excuses, no more lies. Just tell me, did you know?" Jake hesitated, and in that pause, Mark already had his answer. Jake's silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. His eyes darted to the side, like he was searching for the right words, or an escape. Mark felt his stomach twist. He had expected anger, maybe even denial. But this hesitation, this wasn't the reaction of an innocent man. "Say something," Mark demanded, his voice tight. Jake exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think," he muttered. Mark let out a bitter laugh, his grip tightening on the chair. "Not what I think. My kids are yours, Jake. How the hell am I supposed to take that?" Jake finally met his eyes, and for the first time, Mark saw something beyond guilt: fear. Real, undeniable fear. And that stopped him cold. "You don't understand," Jake said, his voice lower now. "I didn't." He hesitated again, jaw tightening. "I didn't do this, Mark. Not like you think." Mark took a step forward, his chest burning with frustration. "Then explain it to me." Jake shook his head. "I tried. I tried to tell you before, but I didn't know how." His voice dropped even lower. "It's not just me, Mark. Someone else knew. Someone else made sure you wouldn't find out." Mark's breath caught. "Who?" Jake hesitated again, but then he swallowed hard and said the name. And in that moment, everything Mark thought he knew about betrayal changed, because the real enemy had been standing in the shadows all along. Mark's breath felt heavy in his chest as Jake's words hung in the air. He had braced himself for betrayal, but not this. Not the name that had just left his brother's mouth. His entire body went rigid. "That's not possible," he said, shaking his head. Jake's eyes were dark, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is, and they've been covering it up for years." The pieces started falling into place, each one more devastating than the last. The strange tension in his marriage, the moments of unease he had brushed aside, the way certain things never quite added up. But what shook him the most was the realization that this wasn't just about Jake. There had been someone else pulling the strings, someone close enough to control the truth. Mark turned toward the door, his pulse hammering. "I need to talk to Emily." Jake stood up fast, his chair scraping against the floor. "Mark, wait." But Mark was already gone. The drive home felt like it lasted forever, his mind racing with every possibility, every lie that had been woven around him. By the time he stepped inside, Emily was waiting. She didn't look surprised to see him, and that sent a fresh wave of unease through him. "You know, don't you?" she said softly. Mark swallowed hard. "Tell me the truth." She let out a shaky breath, eyes glistening with something between guilt and relief. "I was trying to protect you." But Mark wasn't sure if the real betrayal had just begun, or if he had been living in it all along. Mark stood frozen, staring at Emily, his mind spinning. The woman he had loved, trusted, built a life with, had been keeping the biggest secret of all. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Protect me from what?" Emily's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "From the truth," she said, "from what it would do to you." His stomach twisted. "You knew. This whole time you knew. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't deny it. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she admitted. I wanted to tell you, but I was scared. I didn't know how. Mark clenched his jaw, trying to steady himself. And Jake? Emily looked away. He found out later. He tried to make it right. Her voice broke. But by then, it was too late. The weight of everything crashed down on Mark. The betrayal, the lies, the years spent loving a family that had been built on deception. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to scream. But more than anything, he just felt empty. After a long silence, he exhaled, his voice steadier than he felt. I don't know if I can forgive this. Emily wiped her tears, nodding. I know. Mark glanced toward the hallway, where his children slept, unaware of the storm raging around them. He had lost so much in one night. But as he stepped outside, the cold air hitting his face, he realized